She bought an entire ghost town for $800, and in doing so, she changed everything. Picture this: a dusty courthouse on the edge of nowhere, the kind of place where time moves slower and dreams feel like echoes. The auction room is half empty, the air heavy with heat and silence. The auctioneer's voice cracks as he lowers his gavel again and again, waiting for a bid that never comes. And then a quiet voice from the back of the room says, "I'll take it." That voice belonged to Ava Coleman, a single mother of two, a mechanic with grease still under her fingernails, and a woman running out of options. Her life had been shrinking, the rent going up, the jobs drying out, the dreams she'd once had slowly slipping through her hands. When she saw an online ad that read, "Entire town for sale, minimum bid $800, she laughed at first. Then she stared at it for a long time. Maybe, just maybe, this was her way out. Now imagine driving for hours through the desert, pavement, turning to gravel, then to dirt, then to nothing at all. The sky is too big, the silence almost alive. And then, cresting over a small hill, she sees it. Redrock Hollow, her new home. Once, it had been a mining town, a place of hope, hard work, and noise. Now it was 37 buildings of sun-bleached wood, all leaning toward each other like old men sharing secrets. There was a general store with its windows broken, a church missing its bell, and on the corner of Main Street, a bank made of stone, its vault door sealed tight, untouched since the 1970s. Ava stood in the middle of the street, her two kids beside her, their eyes wide with a mix of wonder and fear. "Is it haunted?" her daughter whispered. Ava smiled. "Only by memories," she said. But deep down, something about that vault made her uneasy. You see, in small-town America, every building has a story, and some stories don't want to be told. The locals, still living in the county, called her crazy. People left Redrock Hollow for a reason, they said. Don't go digging where you shouldn't. But Ava had already staked her claim. She'd bought more than land. She'd bought a second chance. This isn't just a story about gold or ghosts or lost towns on forgotten maps. It's a story about belief, about what happens when someone who has nothing left decides to start again anyway. It's about the power of courage, the price of curiosity, and the quiet strength it takes to face what everyone else runs from. Because sometimes the places we think are dead are simply waiting for someone brave enough to bring them back to life. Ava didn't know it yet, but behind that heavy steel door in the old bank lay a secret that had slept for 50 years. Something powerful enough to destroy lives, and perhaps, just maybe, to rebuild them too. As she stood there in the fading light, the desert wind brushing her hair, Ava felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. She didn't know if this was madness or destiny. She only knew that she couldn't turn back. And so, with her children watching, she took her first steps down the cracked wooden porch of the general store, into a world of dust, silence, and stories buried beneath the sand. A town with no people, but with a past that refused to rest. A place where hope and regret were woven into every nail, every stone, every shadow that stretched across Main Street. Some doors, people say, should never be opened. But what if the thing waiting behind them isn't a curse, but a calling? This is the story of Ava Coleman, a woman who bought a ghost town and found something much greater than gold. A story of loss, redemption, and the courage it takes to choose light over darkness. A story about what happens when we stop running from our past and decide to rebuild it instead. So, take a deep breath, listen to the wind across the desert, and come with me back to Redrock Hollow, where the ghosts of yesterday still whisper and one woman dares to turn the key. Let's begin. They say the American dream was built on hard work, but somewhere along the line, hard work stopped being enough. Ava Coleman knew that better than anyone. She'd spent the last decade underneath the hoods of trucks in a fading Arizona town, hands stained with oil and hope. Every night she came home to the same flickering kitchen light, the same stack of unpaid bills, and 2 kids who deserved more than she could give. Rent had gone up again. Groceries cost more every week. Her boss had cut hours just until things picked up. But things never did. For millions of Americans like Ava, the dream wasn't dead. It had simply moved out of reach. And she'd done everything right, worked overtime, saved every spare dollar in a jar above the fridge, said no to vacations, no to new clothes, no to almost everything. But still, she was one bad month away from losing it all, and when the eviction notice finally came, bright orange against the chipped blue paint of her door, Ava didn't cry. She just stared at it, quiet and still, like a mechanic looking at an engine she'd already rebuilt too many times to pretend it could run forever. Across the country, people were living versions of Ava's story. More than half of Americans couldn't handle a $500 emergency without borrowing. Wages had stalled. Housing had tripled. The promise of work hard and you'll make it had turned into a whisper that nobody believed anymore. It wasn't just Ava's roof that was falling apart. It was the roof of a nation built on dreams it no longer funded. So, when she saw the listing that night, entire town for sale, minimum bid $800, something inside her cracked open. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was faith, disguised as foolishness. Maybe both. But she looked at her kids asleep on the couch, one holding the other's hand, and thought, if I don't take a chance, what kind of life am I showing them? Ava sold what little she had that could be sold. The extra tool set, an old TV, the ring she'd kept from a marriage long gone. She didn't tell anyone what she was planning. People around here didn't dream big. They survived small. Yet there was a defiance in her, the kind that comes only from being cornered too many times, the kind that whispers, there has to be something more than this. And maybe that's what the American dream has always been. Not a guarantee, but a dare. The dare to try again when the odds say don't. To build something from the ruins of everything that's failed you. Ava's version of that dream didn't come with a white picket fence or a 9-to-5 job. It came with a map of an empty town and the courage to drive toward it. On the morning she left, the sun hadn't yet climbed over the desert. The truck sputtered, as if unsure about the journey itself. Her daughter Mia clutched a stuffed bear. Her son Eli asked if there'd be Wi-Fi. Ava smiled in the rearview mirror, masking the tremor in her hands. Behind them, the town they were leaving looked smaller by the mile. Rows of houses where no one waved anymore, where people went to sleep tired and woke up the same. The highway stretched ahead, endless and uncertain. Ava didn't have a plan, only a promise, to find a place where her kids could breathe again. The American dream might have cracked, but she was determined to build her own version from whatever pieces were left. And as the sun broke across the desert horizon, washing the world in gold and dust, She whispered to herself, maybe starting over isn't failure. Maybe it's the bravest thing you can do. Because that's the truth, isn't it? Sometimes starting over isn't about chasing the dream everyone else sold you. It's about creating one that finally fits your life. And that's exactly what Ava was about to do, even if she didn't know yet that her new beginning would lead her straight into the heart of an old mystery. Next, we follow Ava's journey into Redrock Hollow, the ghost town she bought for $800, and the secrets waiting in its silence. The first thing Ava noticed about Redrock Hollow wasn't its silence, it was its stillness. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The sun hit the desert in a way that made everything shimmer, but nothing moved. The wooden signs creaked in the wind. The paint flaked off in slow surrender, and the sound of her truck engine felt like an intruder in a place that had forgotten what life sounded like. It wasn't just empty. It was waiting. Redrock Hollow sat in a valley surrounded by red cliffs that caught the evening light like fire. Once, this had been a booming copper town, population 2,000, a main street lined with hope, a place where miners and their families built lives out of sweat and dust. But when the mine closed in 1973, the people left almost overnight. The post office stopped delivering. The church bell stopped ringing. The last headline printed in the town's newspaper read, "Copper vein dry, future uncertain." Then even the press went silent. Now, 50 years later, Ava stood in the middle of Main Street with her 2 kids beside her. 37 buildings stretched out before them, some leaning, some collapsed, some still proud in their decay. The general store, the schoolhouse, the saloon with a faded whiskey and soda sign barely hanging from its hinges. And at the end of the street, like a stone sentinel, stood the bank, its barred windows intact, its steel door still sealed. For a moment, Ava felt small. The vastness of it all pressed down on her. Yet, beneath the fear, there was awe. This wasn't just a ruin, it was a story frozen in time. Every nail, every crack, every piece of rust whispered something about the people who had built it and the lives they'd left behind. To most, Redrock Hollow was worthless, a pile of forgotten timber and sand. But to Ava, it was possibility. It was a clean slate that still carried the fingerprints of history. Her children, Mia and Eli, saw adventure instead of desolation. They ran between the buildings, calling out to each other, their laughter echoing off the empty storefronts. In their voices, the town seemed to breathe again. Ava watched them and realized something powerful. Ruins have their own kind of beauty. They remind us that nothing, no dream, no life, is ever completely gone. Even the broken things hold stories. That night, they camped in their truck under a sky that seemed to stretch forever. The stars burned like promises. The desert has a way of stripping everything down to what really matters. There were no city lights, no neighbors, no noise, just space. And in that space, Ava began to imagine what could be. Maybe she could turn Redrock Hollow into a haven, a small refuge for others who'd lost their footing in the modern world. Maybe the town's decay was its charm, a chance to build something new without erasing what came before. As she explored the next morning, she noticed traces of life everywhere. Faded handbills advertising a dance in the town hall, chalk marks still visible on the blackboard in the school, an old photograph pinned behind glass in the hotel lobby, smiling faces, hats, dresses, people who once believed this place was there forever. There was a warmth in those remnants, a reminder that even in abandonment, memory lingers. But beauty in decay has a darker side. The deeper Ava walked into Redrock Hollow, the more she felt it. The weight of stories untold, the sense that the past wasn't quite finished. There were moments when the wind carried a sound that almost felt like footsteps, when her flashlight flickered as though the walls themselves were breathing. It wasn't haunting. It was presence. The town wasn't empty. It was full of what had been left behind. Ava began to understand why ghost towns draw people in. It's not just curiosity. It's connection. In a world moving too fast, places like Redrock Hollow are reminders of what permanence feels like, even when it's falling apart. They are mirrors reflecting how fragile and fleeting our own lives are, and how much beauty there can be in things that endure past their purpose. By the third day, Ava felt something change in her. The fear of starting over was still there, but it had softened. The town's silence no longer felt threatening. It felt sacred. The cracks in the walls, the shattered windows, the layers of dust, all of it told her that time doesn't destroy, it transforms. Maybe Redrock Hollow wasn't a graveyard at all. Maybe it was a cocoon. She set up her small camp stove in the old general store and brewed coffee as the morning light spilled through the broken roof. The smell filled the air, mixing with the scent of cedar and rust. Outside, her children's laughter drifted in again, and Ava smiled. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from something. She was standing still, and somehow that felt like moving forward. Sometimes, the most broken places can teach us the most about rebuilding, and Redrock Hollow, with all its scars and silence, was about to teach Ava more than she ever imagined. Next, she would discover the heart of the town, the bank and the vault that no one had dared to open for 50 years. It was on the fourth morning that Ava heard the sound of engines. In a place that hadn't heard a motor in decades, it was jarring. 3 pickup trucks grinding up the dirt road, raising a cloud of ochre dust that glowed against the rising sun. Ava wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped out from the general store, heart hammering. Out here, unannounced visitors could mean anything: curiosity, hostility, or both. The first man out of the lead truck looked like he'd been carved from the desert itself. Sun-leathered skin, a hat pulled low, eyes sharp but not cruel. The kind of man who measured twice before speaking once. Behind him, several others climbed down, all with the same quiet authority. Ava straightened, trying not to look afraid. "Can I help you?" she asked. "You the one who bought Redrock Hollow?" the man said. His voice carried the grit of years without apology. "I am," Ava answered. He studied her for a long moment. "Name's Thomas Greyhawk. My family's been on this land long before there was a Redrock Hollow, before the mine, before the railroad. You could say we remember what this place used to be." Ava nodded, unsure where this was going. "Then you probably know more about it than I do." "That's the thing," he said slowly. "Some things are better left unknown." His words hung in the air, heavier than the heat. Behind him, one of the younger men shifted, his boots scraping against the gravel. Ava caught the look in his eyes, half pity, half warning. Thomas stepped closer. "That vault in the bank," he said quietly. "Leave it shut. Whatever you think you'll find in there, it's not worth what it'll cost you." Ava tried to smile, though her pulse quickened. "People keep saying that." Why? Thomas's gaze drifted toward the cliffs. Because when the mine died, it wasn't just because the copper ran out. It was because of what happened in that bank. People started seeing things, hearing things. Folks who worked there got sick. Some disappeared. Then the town emptied in less than a month. No one stayed here longer than a week since. He paused, then looked at her again. My grandfather helped bury what was left of this place. He used to say the ground remembers. Every time someone digs it up, it takes something back. Ava swallowed hard. She wanted to dismiss it as superstition, the kind of folklore that fills empty land with ghosts. But there was something in his tone, a mixture of sorrow and truth that rooted deep in her chest. The men didn't stay long. Before leaving, Thomas handed her a small pouch made of leather, worn soft with age. Sage, he said. If you're staying, burn it. This land doesn't like strangers, but it respects respect. As the trucks disappeared beyond the ridge, Ava stood alone again. The desert was quiet, but it wasn't empty. She could feel the weight of their words pressing against her skin. That night, she sat by the campfire while the kids slept in the truck. The flames cracked softly, shadows dancing across the stone walls of the general store. She turned the pouch over in her hands. The smell of sage brought memories of her grandmother, who'd once told her, "Not every mystery needs solving. Some just need understanding." It wasn't fear that kept Ava awake. It was curiosity. What could be so terrible inside that vault that it silenced an entire town? What truth was so dangerous it had to be buried under 50 years of dust and warning? And yet, underneath her unease, there was a flicker of defiance. Ava had rebuilt engines that others gave up on. She'd fixed what people said was unfixable. Redrock Hollow felt no different. The next morning, as the desert sun poured gold across the ruins, Ava made a choice. She would listen, but she would also look. If the ground remembered, then maybe it could also forgive. Because sometimes the difference between destruction and discovery isn't fear, it's purpose. And as she turned her eyes toward the old bank at the end of the street, she couldn't shake the feeling that the desert wasn't trying to stop her at all. It was testing her, asking whether she was ready to know what the town had hidden for half a century. Ava couldn't let Thomas Greyhawk's warning go. His voice, steady, ancient, threaded with something like grief, echoed in her mind long after the sound of the trucks had faded. That night, she sat awake by the dim light of a lantern, staring at the map of Redrock Hollow she'd found tacked to the back of the old general store door. Every building was labeled in neat, fading script. At the bottom, one note stood out: Vault, sealed, federal matter. The words clung to her thoughts like burrs. Federal matter. She turned them over and over in her mind. Why would the federal government have business in a mining town this small? Why would anyone care enough to seal a bank vault for half a century? The next morning, Ava drove the 2 hours to the county records office. The building itself was another ghost. Fluorescent lights buzzing, walls lined with metal cabinets that smelled of dust and time. The clerk, a young woman with coffee stains on her shirt, looked at Ava like she'd just asked for a file on Atlantis. Redrock Hollow? Haven't heard that name in years, she said. Ava smiled politely. Maybe that's why I'm asking. Together, they pulled box after box from the archives. Property deeds, mine reports, tax ledgers, faded photos of men in hard hats standing in front of mountains of ore. Ava flipped through them for hours, eyes burning, until she found it. A thick folder stamped Federal Correspondence, 1973. Inside were yellowed letters, telegrams, typed reports that crackled when she turned the pages. One letter, dated February 25, 1973, stopped her cold. It was from the FBI, addressed to the local sheriff. In response to your inquiry regarding the deaths at Redrock Hollow Savings and Loan, a formal investigation is being initiated into the possible theft of federal gold reserves. Please ensure the bank premises are secured and that the vault remains sealed until the arrival of federal agents, expected within 30 days. Ava read the line again and again. Federal gold reserves. Her pulse quickened. Had the government actually stored gold in Redrock Hollow? It sounded absurd, like a conspiracy theory whispered in an old bar. But as she dug deeper, the story unfolded piece by piece. She found bank ledgers that ended abruptly in February of that year. Newspaper clippings described 3 deaths in 3 weeks. The bank president, an assistant manager, and the head teller, all officially ruled natural causes. But the coroner's reports told another story. Strange symptoms, inconsistent timelines, closed caskets. Then, on June 30th, the town was gone. The last entry in the county register was a single line. All federal assets accounted for. Site secured pending further directive. There were no further directives. Ava leaned back, rubbing her temples. The air in the records room felt heavier now. The story wasn't just about a failed town. It was about something hidden, something valuable enough to make people die and disappear. When she returned to Redrock Hollow, the sun was setting. The desert had that copper glow that made everything look both alive and haunted. She parked outside the bank and sat for a long moment, staring at its barred windows. The truth was starting to take shape, and with it came danger. She began documenting everything. She photographed the letters, transcribed the reports, and filled a notebook with connections. If the vault truly held forgotten federal gold, its discovery could change everything. Her life, her children's future, maybe even the town's fate. But there was also something else, something moral, something human. What if the gold had destroyed everyone who touched it before? That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed every detail, every warning, every ghost story. Maybe Thomas had been right. Maybe the ground really did remember. Maybe some doors were locked, not to hide treasure, but to keep the past contained. Still, she couldn't shake the pull of the mystery. In a life defined by fixing what was broken, how could she walk away from a secret this big? So, she made a plan. She would open the vault, but not recklessly. She'd gather proof, document everything, and if it was what she suspected, she'd tell the truth, no matter how heavy it was. Ava didn't know it yet, but she was no longer chasing survival. She was chasing history. And history, as she was about to learn, doesn't let go easily. Next, the vault opens, and what Ava finds inside will blur the line between fortune and fate forever. The night Ava decided to open the vault, the wind was restless. It swept through Redrock Hollow like a warning, tugging at the loose tin roofs and whispering through the cracks in the old wooden signs. The moon was low, a dull silver coin in the desert sky. She stood in front of the bank with a flashlight in one hand and the heavy ring of keys in the other, the same keys the county clerk had handed her weeks ago. Dozens of them, each tagged with faded labels: hotel, post office, jail, bank. But one tag had always stood out. The small brass one, engraved simply with the word Federal. Inside, the bank looked exactly as it must have 50 years earlier. Dust lay thick on the counters, but the brass fixtures still gleamed faintly beneath it. A few papers were scattered on the floor, withdrawal slips, a ledger book frozen mid-entry, pens turned to rust. And at the back of the room, the vault waited. It loomed like a sleeping animal, silent, solid, and unknowable. Ava ran her hand over the cold metal door. The plaque above the combination dial read, Harrisburg Safe Co. Time Lock Security System. Engaged. February 28, 1973. Duration, 50 years. Her pulse quickened. She did the math. It was October 2023. The lock should have expired months ago. She found the keyhole beneath the grime, a small octagonal slot she hadn't noticed before. Her fingers trembled as she fitted the Federal key into place. It slid in perfectly, like a puzzle piece that had been waiting 50 years for her hand. For a long time, she didn't move. Once she turned that key, there would be no going back. No pretending she hadn't found something the world had forgotten. Finally, she whispered to herself, for the truth, and turned it. A deep, mechanical click echoed through the room. Then came a chorus of shifting gears, the sound of metal remembering how to move. Dust fell from the seams as tumblers unlocked one by one. The massive handle, frozen in place for half a century, loosened under her grip. Ava took a deep breath, pulled, and the vault door swung open with a groan that felt almost alive. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Dry, metallic, like air that hadn't been breathed since the 1970s. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness and landed on something that made her knees buckle. Gold. Bars of it, stacked from floor to ceiling, gleaming like sunlight, trapped in metal, each one stamped with the seal of the United States Treasury. For a second, Ava couldn't speak. Her breath caught in her throat. There had to be hundreds, maybe thousands. At current prices, it was worth over $200 million. But then her light moved, and she saw the chairs, 3 of them, arranged neatly around a small wooden table in the center of the vault. And in those chairs, the shapes of 3 people slumped forward, unmoving. Time had reduced them to husks, mummified figures in faded 1970s clothing, preserved by the sealed air. Ava's stomach turned. The realization hit her like a punch. These were the bankers, the same 3 names she'd read in the reports: William Hartley, James Chen, and Margaret Morrison. She forced herself closer. On the table between them lay a revolver with 3 empty chambers and a stack of papers, yellowed but still legible. With trembling hands, Ava lifted the top page. The first line read, "We are dying by our own choice, rather than live with what we have done." It was a confession. She read it all, word by word, while the silence pressed down around her. The letter told the story of greed, guilt, and desperation. The 3 had discovered the forgotten gold, Federal reserves left behind after World War II. They began stealing it, melting it, replacing the bars with painted lead. But the plan fell apart. Hartley's daughter died in an accident, and grief broke him. Chen feared exposure and poisoned him to keep him silent. Morrison, horrified, poisoned Chen in turn. Then, racked with guilt, she sealed the vault, drank the last of the poison herself, and wrote their final words. "We locked this vault so no one else would repeat our sin. If you find this gold, use it for good. Build something. Do not let it destroy you. like it destroyed us. Ava sank to the cold floor. The flashlight trembled in her hand. In front of her were the ghosts of 3 people who had lost everything, chasing what everyone else thought they wanted: wealth, power, security. But what they found instead was the truth no one ever teaches. Gold doesn't shine in the dark. Tears welled in her eyes. For years, she'd believed money was the key to survival, that if she could just earn enough, save enough, she'd finally be safe. But looking at those bodies, she understood something deeper. Security isn't built on what you own. It's built on what you can live with when you have nothing left. She closed the folder gently, her hands steady now. The gold shimmered all around her, but she no longer saw fortune. She saw consequence. Standing at the vault's edge, Ava whispered, "I hear you." Then she turned off the flashlight and let the darkness have the last word. When she stepped outside, dawn was breaking over the cliffs. The air felt lighter, as if the town itself had exhaled. The vault was open now, but Ava knew she'd uncovered more than just treasure. She'd uncovered the truth that had haunted Redrock Hollow for half a century. The question now wasn't what she had found. It was what she would do with it. Next, Ava faces the hardest choice of all: whether to keep the secret or reveal it, and how to turn guilt into redemption. The morning after Ava opened the vault, Redrock Hollow was quieter than ever. The air hung thick with the weight of what she had seen: the gold, the bodies, the handwritten confession that felt like a message meant for her alone. The desert sun poured through the cracked windows of the bank, glinting off the gold bars stacked like promises. Promises that had already cost 3 lives. Ava stood in the doorway, her fingers tracing the edge of the confession paper. She'd read it again before dawn, over and over, until the words blurred. Use it for good. Build something. Don't let it destroy you. Simple words, but heavy with a kind of wisdom only regret can teach. She knew she couldn't ignore what she'd found, but every option felt dangerous. Reporting it meant the FBI, the press, the noise, and the chance she'd lose everything she'd built here. Keeping it meant carrying a secret too big for one person. And the gold itself, hundreds of bars gleaming in the dark, was like a living thing, humming with temptation. That day she walked through the town in silence, watching her children chase each other between the ruins, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. This is what I wanted to protect, she thought. Not money, not legacy. Them. In a small way, the choice had already been made. Ava wasn't the kind of person who ran away from truth. She'd built her life, fixing what others abandoned: machines, homes, even her own hope. But this wasn't just another broken thing. This was a moral earthquake. That night, she spread every piece of evidence across the table in the general store. Photos of the vault, the confession, the FBI letter from 1973. It wasn't just gold. It was government property. Forgotten, maybe, but not hers. The same system that had failed her might try to claim it, but she refused to let the story repeat. So she made a plan that wasn't about keeping or losing. It was about doing right. At dawn, Ava drove to the nearest town with a working signal. Her hands shook as she dialed the number for the Las Vegas FBI field office. She told them everything. The agent on the other end, calm, skeptical, listened. Then silence. Finally, a voice said, "Ma'am, are you saying you've found lost federal gold reserves?" Ava took a breath. I'm saying I found what your files stopped looking for 50 years ago. 2 days later, a convoy of black SUVs rolled into Redrock Hollow, tires crunching over the dirt. Men and women in dark suits stepped out, scanning the horizon as if ghosts might be watching. The lead agent was a woman named Sarah Delbridge. Sharp eyes, steady voice, the kind of person who'd seen more than she wanted to remember. She studied Ava carefully as they walked to the bank. Most people would have kept it, she said, taken a few bars, disappeared. No one would have known. I would have known, Ava replied. Delbridge nodded. That was enough. For 3 days, they cataloged every bar, cross-checking serial numbers against records long thought lost. Each match confirmed the impossible. The gold had indeed been part of the wartime Federal Reserves, hidden in small banks across the West to prevent theft or attack. Redrock Hollow's vault had been one of the forgotten caches, but as they worked, Delbridge noticed something else, the way Ava hovered, not with greed, but with reverence, as if the vault wasn't a crime scene, but a grave. On the last day, Delbridge found Ava outside, sitting on the steps of the general store, staring at the horizon. The trucks carrying the gold rumbled away, the sound fading into the desert distance. You did the right thing, Delbridge said. Ava nodded. It doesn't feel like winning. It's not supposed to, the agent replied. Doing the right thing rarely does. But it lasts. When the dust settled, the government awarded Ava a finder's fee, a number so large it barely felt real, enough to rebuild Redrock Hollow, enough to give her children a future, enough to finally rest. But she didn't spend it like someone chasing wealth. She spent it like someone building something sacred. The general store became a home. The schoolhouse became a community space. The old hotel, once filled with ghosts, was reborn as a museum, a place to tell the town's story honestly and gently. And the bank, the place that had once held greed and death, became something different entirely. A memorial to the people who lost themselves to the very thing they sought to own. Ava understood then that gold doesn't change people. It only reveals them. For those who seek it out of fear, it devours. For those who use it out of love, it can rebuild. Redrock Hollow began to fill again, not with miners or fortune seekers, but with dreamers, artists, families, people drawn to the idea that even the most broken places could be reborn. Standing at the edge of Main Street one evening, Ava watched the sunset spill gold across the cliffs and smiled. It looked nothing like the treasure she'd found, but everything like the treasure she'd built. The choice she'd made had cost her comfort, safety, certainty, but it gave her back something greater, peace. And as the wind carried the scent of sage through the town once more, Ava finally understood the meaning of the confession's last line. Don't let it destroy you. She hadn't. She'd transformed it. Next, in the final chapter, Part 8, The Resurrection of Redrock Hollow, we'll see how Ava's courage turned a forgotten town into a living symbol of redemption, and how the ghosts of the past found peace in the light of what she built. For months after the gold was taken away, Redrock Hollow slept again, but it was a different kind of sleep this time. Not the silence of decay, but the quiet that comes before rebirth. The air felt lighter, the wind sounded softer, even the shadows seemed to have loosened their grip. Ava walked the empty streets each morning, the crunch of gravel under her boots echoing through the canyons, and for the first time she didn't feel alone. The government had wired the finder's reward to her account, a sum so large it almost didn't make sense. She stared at the numbers for a long time before closing the laptop and whispering, "Let's build something good." And she did. Her first act was to restore the old schoolhouse. She replaced the broken windows, sanded the floors, and painted the walls a soft cream that caught the desert light. The bell that hadn't rung since 1973 sang again that spring. It wasn't just a building, it was a beginning. Ava turned it into a community center, part classroom, part gathering hall, part shelter for anyone who needed a second chance. Word spread faster than she expected. Within months, artists, teachers, and travelers began arriving. People who had been looking for something they couldn't name. Some came from as far as Oregon and Colorado, drawn by online photos of the restored buildings, the crimson cliffs, the way the sunset seemed to stretch forever. They brought their stories, their talents, their scars. Redrock Hollow became a kind of sanctuary for the restless and the rebuilding. Ava used part of her funds to install solar panels across the rooftops, drilled a new well, and rebuilt the town's power grid. "If we're going to start over," she told her kids, "we'd do it clean." The irony wasn't lost on her. That gold, once the root of greed and death, was now fueling something sustainable and alive. By the end of the first year, Redrock Hollow had 15 full-time residents. By the second, it had 40. A small cafe opened in the old saloon. A craftsman from New Mexico turned the blacksmith shop into an artist's studio. A couple from Montana opened a bed and breakfast in the restored hotel. Every nail hammered, every wall painted, carried a piece of intention, a promise that this time the town would be built on hope, not hunger. Ava didn't call herself the founder or the mayor. She just became its caretaker. People naturally gravitated toward her, seeking advice, guidance, quiet strength. She had a way of making hard truths sound like second chances, and though she rarely spoke about the vault, everyone knew the story. It became part of Redrock Hollow's identity, the town that once fell to greed, now reborn from grace. There were skeptics, of course. A few journalists tried to sensationalize it, dubbing her the woman who gave back the gold. She avoided interviews, preferring action over headlines. "Let the story tell itself," she'd say, smiling faintly. "The truth always finds its way home." Over time, Redrock Hollow turned into something more than a town. It became a living metaphor. Universities sent students to study sustainable rebuilding. Psychologists cited it as a model for community-based healing. Documentaries called it the town that forgave itself. And through it all, Ava stayed grounded. She still fixed engines. She still brewed coffee for volunteers at dawn. She still walked Main Street at sunset, pausing sometimes to whisper a quiet thank you to the ghosts that once haunted it. The memorial she built inside the bank was small and simple. 3 chairs, preserved exactly as she found them, with a single plaque that read, "What we bury in guilt, we can resurrect in grace." Visitors often left flowers there, or notes folded between the bricks, messages of apology, forgiveness, gratitude, and every now and then, when the desert wind passed through the open doors, the air would carry a faint metallic hum, like the sound of the vault, exhaling one last breath. Ava's children grew up among the red cliffs, learning not from textbooks, but from the rhythm of rebuilding. Mia became a teacher, Eli an architect. Together, they carried the town's story forward, not as legend, but as living truth. One evening, years later, Ava stood on the same ridge where she'd first seen Redrock Hollow, back when it was nothing but dust and memory. Below her, lights twinkled from windows that hadn't glowed in half a century. The town was alive again, small but steady, built not on gold, but on gratitude. She thought of the miners, the bankers, the families who once walked those streets, of Thomas Greyhawk and his warning, of the confession letter she'd kept folded in her pocket all these years. She smiled softly and whispered into the wind, "We did it right this time." The sun slipped below the horizon, turning the cliffs to blood and honey. For a moment, the whole valley shimmered, as if the desert itself was remembering what hope looked like. And in that light, Redrock Hollow wasn't a ghost town anymore. It was a heartbeat. Because sometimes resurrection isn't about undoing the past, it's about using its ashes to build something that finally deserves to last. And that's how one woman, one town, and one forgotten vault turned loss into legacy. Redrock Hollow lives, not as a place, but as proof that even what's buried can bloom again. Years later, long after the last gold bar had been hauled away and the reporters had forgotten her name, Ava Coleman would sometimes sit outside the general store at dusk, sipping coffee and watching the light change across the cliffs. The desert still carried its secrets, but now it carried laughter too. Children's voices echoed down Main Street where tumbleweeds once rolled without witness. The sound of a hammer somewhere in the distance meant another building was being repaired, another dream quietly taking shape. Redrock Hollow was alive, and so was she. In those quiet evenings, Ava often thought about the vault. Not the gold itself, but what it represented. For most of her life, she'd believed the American dream was about reaching, climbing higher, earning more, owning something solid. But the vault had taught her something deeper. Sometimes, the real treasure isn't what you find when you open the door. It's what you choose to carry out with you and what you choose to leave behind. That lesson spread far beyond the desert. News of Redrock Hollow's rebirth became a kind of parable told in classrooms, podcasts, and documentaries. Economists cited it as a study in ethical recovery. Psychologists used it as a metaphor for trauma healing. People who'd never heard of Ava wrote to her, letters from across the country, thanking her for reminding them that rebuilding doesn't always require wealth. Sometimes it just takes honesty and the courage to start again. Ava never thought of herself as a teacher, but she became one anyway. When visitors came to see the memorial inside the old bank, she would sometimes stand quietly near the doorway, listening to their whispers. One day, a young woman approached her, eyes shining. "Do you ever wish you'd kept it?" she asked. Ava smiled, that soft, knowing smile that only time can shape. "I did keep it," she said, "just not the way you think." She wasn't wrong. The gold was gone, but its value had multiplied in a different form. Redrock Hollow was now self-sustaining, powered by sunlight, fed by a wellspring of purpose. Its school had grown into a learning center for those seeking to rebuild their own lives. Workshops on repair, sustainability, and storytelling drew people from all over the country. Every visitor left something behind. A word, a lesson, a spark. The town had become what the vault once pretended to be, a source of lasting wealth. And in the end, that was the quiet miracle of it all. The gold had been meant to secure a nation's fortune, but it ended up restoring something rarer, its faith. Ava had turned metal into meaning, greed into growth, isolation into community. One autumn afternoon, as she walked through the square, she noticed a plaque someone new had placed beneath the old Redrock sign. It read, "The richest people are not those who find gold, but those who discover why they no longer need it." Ava stopped for a moment, tracing the letters with her fingertips. She didn't know who had written it, but she felt its truth settle deep within her chest. The town wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had found a piece of themselves here, and to everyone still searching. That night, as the desert cooled and the stars took their places, Ava sat on the porch of the general store, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the hum of the town she'd resurrected. The same wind that once whispered warnings now carried laughter and guitar music from the old saloon. The ghosts of Redrock Hollow had not disappeared. They had simply learned to rest. Looking out at the horizon, Ava thought about the beginning, the dusty auction room, the $800 bid, the silence that had started it all. She smiled. "We were all chasing gold," she murmured. "But maybe what we really needed was light." The fire in her lantern flickered gently, mirroring the stars overhead. And, as the night deepened, the town that had once been lost to greed glowed softly under the Arizona sky, a reminder that even the darkest vaults can open to grace, because in the end, the greatest treasure Ava Coleman ever uncovered wasn't made of metal. It was made of meaning. It was the simple, enduring truth that everything broken, towns, dreams, people, can be rebuilt. If only someone dares to begin. When the credits of Ava's story begin to roll in the mind, what stays isn't the image of gold bars or an old bank vault. It's the feeling that something lost had finally found its way home. The story of Redrock Hollow may seem like one woman's fight against time and greed, but in truth it's a mirror held up to every one of us. How many vaults do we keep locked inside ourselves, filled not with treasure, but with fear, regret, or the weight of what we once wanted too much? Ava's journey reminds us that fortune isn't measured in what we keep, but in what we heal. She didn't just reopen a ghost town. She reopened the idea that starting over is still possible, even when the world says it's too late. And maybe that's why her story feels so close, because every broken place, every lost dream, every silent street in our hearts carries the same invitation to rebuild. Across America, there are hundreds of Redrock Hollows, towns that industry forgot, neighborhoods that once thrived and then fell silent. Yet somewhere, someone like Ava is looking at those ruins and seeing not an ending, but a beginning. Maybe that's the quiet revolution we all need, to turn our buried mistakes into blueprints, our failures into foundations. So the next time you stand before something that feels too broken to save, your career, your relationship, your dream, remember Ava's hands, covered in dust, gripping the vault door. Remember that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just whispers, "Try again." Because the truth is, every one of us is walking through our own Redrock Hollow. We all have something that asks to be rebuilt, redeemed, or reimagined. And the gold we're searching for may not shine at all. It might just feel like peace, purpose, or belonging. If Ava's story has taught us anything, it's this: what you uncover is never as important as what you choose to do with it. So maybe ask yourself, what's the vault you're ready to open? What truth have you buried long enough? And what could your own resurrection look like If you dared to turn the key. If this story moved you, share it. If it made you think, talk about it. And if it made you see your own life differently, maybe that's the beginning of your own Redrock Hollow. Because sometimes the greatest stories don't end. They echo, quietly, reminding us that light is always waiting just beyond the lock. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep your heart open, your hand steady, and your courage louder than your fear,